Kantian ethics, we're going to go through this quite quickly. It's fairly straightforward and it's got a nice clear structure. So the top thin box is to outline what type of theory it is. So Kantian ethics is a theory based on reason and logic. It is not clouded by emotion or sense experience. All of Kant's work is found in his book, The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. He is, of course, a rationalist because his argument is based on reason. So that is the reason why it is based on reason, because that's the approach he took. Ethical dilemmas are based on intention, not future outcomes, so it's deontological. We know this because deon means duty. So we know it's deontological because deon means duty. It is an absolute theory. The command to do one's duty is invariable. It's unquestionable. You must do it. Not doing one's duty is always absolutely wrong. So that all goes in the top thin box, please. This is a good place to start an introduction. This is a good place to set the scene for your essays. You also have a number of points on there that you can later evaluate, such as the ideas that it's not clouded by emotion or sense experience. So you can use people for and against him, such as empiricists, like Hume, for example. So there is a lot of a potential evaluation there. Where we are going is we're going to the three boxes underneath. One is for duty, one is for goodwill, and one is for moral law. So the duty of the first box underneath. Duty is what you ought to do. You have a moral obligation to perform it, and we have the free will to follow our duty and work it out through reason. Free will for Kant is very, very important. So we have been given free will in order to work out our duty, applying reason. Doing what is right for no other reason than because it is good, the right thing to do. So you are considering consequences. You are not thinking about what might happen. You are focusing purely on the action at hand, the duty at hand, using your reason to work it out. As long as you do your duty, you are morally blameless. Now that bullet point there is very, very important. Duty is discovered through the categorical imperative. This now is pass-fail territory. You absolutely, in any Kant question, must talk about both duty and the categorical imperative, which is your three formulations. So even if the question is on duty, you have to bring in the categorical imperative. They are different sides of the same coin. It is your duty to do the categorical imperative. You work out the categorical imperative through doing your duty. So they go hand in hand together. It is your duty to do it, and the categorical imperative supports it. So that bullet point there is very, very important. If you get a question on the categorical imperative specifically, like universalizability, you have to talk about duty. There are also three things that cannot be involved when doing your duty. You have to do it for duty's sake, so no emotion. You cannot do it because of an emotional response. You cannot do it for personal gain, so you cannot do it to get something out of it. And you cannot do it because somebody has told you to do it, so no authority command. Final bit for that box. Using your emotions like kindness and generosity, Kant argues, are not wrong. It's not wrong to be kind, but it's just not moral. It's what is called amoral. So you have immoral, bad, moral, good. Amoral is just an action. It's just in the middle, like putting the washing out. So Kant argues that being kind is just something mundane, normal, everyday. The only type of morality is morals that follow duty. You then have a fantastic quote in the bubble. I highly recommend you write that down. Duty involves freely choosing the action. 6 words. The whole of Kant's argument for duty is summed up in those 6. This idea of freely choosing, you have to be free in order to do it. Focusing on the action and not the outcome, so the deontological element of it. Very nice place to start an essay. So you could, for example, start an introduction by saying, Rationalist Kant, in The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, says that duty involves freely choosing the action. This means that you have to be autonomous in order to decide on the action that you wish to take. This, therefore, is following one's duty. Something like that. Obviously, that's not brilliant, but it shows how you incorporate the quote into an introduction. Would anybody like a highlighter? Middle box then is for goodwill. The act is only good if it's an act based on a sense of goodwill. A moral action is one performed with goodwill, wanting to benefit others' good intention. Goodwill shines forth like a precious jewel. This is a very popular quote that students like to use. What you should be able to see quite quickly from Kant's language of goodwill, and there's a quote coming later on this slide as well, it's quite vague language. If you said to me what actually is goodwill, I wouldn't be able to answer you that, because Kant uses very fluffy language to describe it, like a precious jewel. How does goodwill shine forth like a precious jewel? What does that actually mean? Or the idea that the good intention, it's the act is only good and based on a sense of goodwill. What does these things actually mean? What is goodwill? He says goodwill is the highest form of good, and he uses the example of a shopkeeper. This is obviously a really nice link to your business ethics if you get a question that overlaps Kant with business. He says a shopkeeper might be pleasant, but it is basically because he or she wants the customer's money in order to make a profit. That's why there's a picture of coupons, because I was a coupons girl when I was a student. Was I pleasant and nice to the customers because I wanted to show them goodwill? No, it was because I wanted to get paid. So goodwill for Kant is not because it benefits you, not for a personal gain or emotion, so like linked with your duty. It is because it's the highest form of good and you do it because it's the right thing to do. He then says this quote. Now you don't have to write the whole quote down. He says it's impossible to conceive of anything at all in the world or even out of it which should be taken as good without qualification except goodwill. What that means is, not only within this world, but even out of this world, there is nothing that can be taken as good without qualification. Qualification means, like if you go for university or a job, you have to give qualifications, you have to justify why you're right for that job or that position or role. He's saying it's the only thing that doesn't need to be justified or explained. It is just goodwill. It is the only thing that does not need a justification. And that's probably why he doesn't give one. He says other qualities like kindness can be misused. Once again, don't forget you need to evaluate this throughout. So you can focus on how it's a positive idea. This focus on goodwill, it gives people a focus, it gives people a purpose, and it's positive. But then the weaknesses are potentially the vagueness of it. What does it actually mean? How do you know you're achieving it? How do you know you're doing it with goodwill? Excellent. All right, third and final point is moral law. Duty and goodwill together make the moral law. You've got to think of this as like a triangle. Duty, goodwill and moral law all go together. So duty and goodwill combined means you are following the moral law. So they're not three separate parts. They're not three separate things. They all again go together. He says the moral law within. Now, that's only 4 words, but it is a quote. And it's a very good quote, because what Kant is saying there, the moral law within, means that it's within each of us. We all have the potential to follow the moral law if we use our reason and our autonomy correctly. So it means that everyone can reason how they ought to behave in a situation. You are free to choose to follow it or not. So he's not saying everybody does follow it. He's saying you're free to choose it or not. And if you do choose to follow it, then you are morally blameless. All moral life strives for the summum bonum. Now, the summum bonum obviously is speaking in an afterlife, this highest goodness that you can ever achieve. The summum bonum is not just a Kantian idea. This isn't Kant's word. This is an idea that's been around for 1,000 years before Kant even. Even Augustine talks about the summum bonum. So these ideas of the highest good being achieved is not just centred on Kant's ideas. But for him, he believes that everything strives towards that. In the groundwork, so the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, in the groundwork, Kant argues that errors occur in moral thinking when following heteronymous approaches, that is, arguments based on following laws set down by others. So heteronymous approaches could be something like the primary precepts of natural law, or the law of the land, so the law says do not murder, or the church that says you cannot get married if you are in a homosexual relationship, whatever it might be. So whatever it might be, Kant says that is not the approach to take. You should not just follow heteronymous approaches. Why? Because it doesn't allow you to develop your own moral law through your reason. The only law that you should follow is that one based on your duty, not just following laws that somebody or something else has set down, because then where's the autonomy in that? You do something and you say, oh, it's because that law told me to, or that law said it was okay. No, you do things because you know it's the right thing to do.
Basically, just like duty, like, you're alright to be immoral as long as you're doing your duty.
Yes. Yes, so sometimes duty could lead to something immoral, but as long as you're doing your duty, then you're doing the right thing. Yeah.
It's exactly the same, but just
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, hence why they all go together. Oh, apologies, that's it. Where we're going underneath is, of course, the hypothetical and then the categorical imperative. The 3 boxes at the bottom are going to be the first formulation, second and third. The good thing about Kant is it is just so structured. Your 5-paragraph rule, your structure of application is so clear. So this would be the first section, the ideas of duty linked in with goodwill and moral law. You've then got the hypothetical versus categorical, and any of these sections you might get a specific question on in the exam, but they all go hand in hand together. So first part of the box, as you see, the slide mirrors the sheet. The hypothetical imperative is a command to achieve a desired result. It's something you do to get something else. If I want X, I must do Y. That's not a quote from Kant, it's just like something you would say. So if I want to go on holiday, I must save up for it. If I want to pass my exams, I must revise. It always involves an if. So, for example, if somebody said to you, hypothetically, you know the next word is going to be, if I do this, you always know if hypothetical means it involves an if. They're going to give you an option in order to get a desired result. Kant did not agree with this imperative, however, for 3 reasons. You don't have to number them, you don't have to remember all 3, you just need to remember that Kant did not agree with it. For 1, it's teleological. You only do it if you want the end outcome. So you only do it if you want to pass your exams or go on holiday. 2, it's not absolute. Meaning there's many other ways you can pass your exam, there's many other ways you can go on holiday other than saving up for it, for example. And 3, it has nothing to do with ethics. Passing exams has nothing to do with ethics. Saving up for a holiday has nothing to do with ethics. So many students ask, why is it there at all? What is the point of learning hypothetical imperative? It is show the alternative to the categorical. So often people would go to Kant and say, well, is this an example of a categorical imperative? And Kant would go, no, that's a hypothetical. It's the alternative. It's to show the opposite of it. This is to make the categorical imperative clearer as to what you should do, not as a hypothetical. The box next to it is the categorical imperative, an act that is good in itself, so intrinsically good regardless of consequences. Intrinsically is a word you see quite often. They might even put it into an exam question. It just means good within itself or just within itself. So it's intrinsic, it's inside. So it's just good within itself regardless of what consequences it brings you. It is not dependent on what you might wish or what you might want. It does not differ between people. It's the same for everybody and is what you should, you must, you will do. Absolute objective, no questions. It is the right thing to do, no justification, and it's in line with your duty. And you have the 3 formulations. If you wish to, you could write the 1, 2, 3 at the bottom as the titles of the next 3 boxes. That's fine, or you could write them within the same box. But the 3 formulations, Formula 1, formula of the law of nature, which is universalizability, formula of the end in itself, means to an end, and formula of the kingdom of ends. These are the 3 that we're going to move on to in a second. In your exam, there are 2 types of questions. One that will just ask you for Kant on its own, or will ask you for Kant with business or a moral decision. Last year's AS exam had Kant is too abstract to be able to make moral decisions, something along those lines. And so students could talk about moral decisions in general, students could link it to Kant's own examples, or they could bring in business if they wished. You could get a question to something like, to what extent is duty helpful when making moral decisions? You would still talk about categorical imperative in the same way.
In terms of like just duty in general, like,
yeah.
Does he define what anyone's duty is?
No.
Or?
He does not define what anyone's duty is. He believes you know it through your reason. So he believes that everybody has a duty, but that duty is unique to that person. So that person will know what their duty is.
So essentially, it could be like duty could be as much as someone's like life motto, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
So as long as it's got that.
So your duty could be anything like a life motto, as long as it's worked out via reason, as long as it's in line with the categorical imperative 3 formulations, and he would argue that whatever it then is would be the right thing to do. Yeah.
Right.
But as far as specifics, Kant doesn't give specifics. Yeah.
So just duty is anything you believe you should do.
Yes. As long as, again, no emotion, no authority, kind of no personal gain as well. Yes. Bless you. Bottom bit is on the next slide as well, so we'll move on. Next slide then is for the 3 boxes at the bottom. So the 3 boxes at the bottom represent the 3 boxes on the slide. The first formulation is universalizability. Act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will, that it will become a universal law. I highly recommend you learn that quote. I learnt it when I was a student. It is doable. It is a bit longer than normal quotes, but it epitomises what Kant is trying to argue. Maxim is a general rule. So what that is saying, universalizability sounds complicated. It's not. If you break down the words, universal is ability. It's the ability to universalize laws to everyone. It's the ability to apply a general rule or a maxim to everyone all over the world, to then conclude whether you should or should not do it as an individual. So, for example, if everyone gave a little money to charity universally all over the world, people in poverty could improve their lives. So you could apply the maxim of everyone gives a little to charity. You could apply that maxim and something good would happen. Therefore, you as an individual should do it. Kant is not arguing that everybody is going to do it. Kant is arguing that this is the way you work out what you should do as an individual. If everyone did what you're thinking of doing, would something good or something bad happen? If something bad happens, you cannot do it as an individual. If something good happens, you can do it as an individual. Students are often not big fans of Kantian ethics. However, that argument is quite powerful. That argument is something that people do think. So I always give the example of when I was a student, I was walking home and I had some litter and I just thought, oh, I'll just drop it on the floor. Nobody's around, nobody will know, what's the big deal? And then Kantian ethics popped into my head and it said, well, if everybody thought the same, the streets would be filthy, everything would be awful, and I wouldn't want to live in a society like that. So what did I do? I put the litter back in my pocket and took it home, put it in the bin like I should have done in the first place. But Kantian ethics was the argument I thought of. If everyone thought the same as me, something bad would happen, therefore I should not do it as an individual. Kant presents his own 4 arguments. Lying promise. If everybody made promises they knew they weren't going to keep, something bad would happen. Suicide, if everybody committed suicide. Neglecting one's talents. So if everybody just didn't bother. So your talent might be to be a doctor, your talent might be to be a teacher or a nurse. If people just thought, nah, not going to bother, then society would never progress and you'd never have people making discoveries, etc. And refraining from helping others. If we didn't help one another and it was a dog-eat-dog world, life would be very, very hard. This for Kant is the argument. Everything centres on universalisability. The other 2 are just extensions of this first one. This for Kant was the argument. Your duty is to follow universalisability, and universalisability helps you work out what your duty is. Formula of the end in itself then means to an end, so this goes in the middle box. Every rational being exists as an end in himself and not merely as a means to be arbitrarily used by this or that will. Again, you don't need to write the whole quote down, but arbitrary, we know that word, it means randomly selecting. And so basically, do not pick people, do not befriend people or use people as a means randomly for your own gain. So don't randomly select people for what you can get out of them. Use them as an end in themselves. Some students say, what does it mean by means and ends? An end is just who they are as a person. Just liking them for who they are, not for what you can get from them. So don't befriend somebody because they have a car. Don't be nice to somebody because you fancy their sister or their brother. Don't use them as a means to your own gains. You should always treat people as an end, never as a means only. Do not use people as a means to your own end. When it comes to the exam, you might have to link Kant to business or sex ethics. This will not be linked to euthanasia. Euthanasia is just natural and situation ethics. But you could make links, for example, using somebody for sex or taking advantage of somebody, like premarital sex, taking advantage of somebody who is younger, who doesn't understand the situation. So you're using them as a means to your own ends. There might be an example in business, using countries that don't have strict moral codes of ethics or strict moral human right codes to get cheaper labour. You're using them as a means to your own ends, which is to gain profit, none of which is your duty. Formula of the kingdom as ends is the final one. Every individual should behave as though every other individual was an end. So again, very much like the second formulation. Oops. I should think of my action as a rule for everyone. So you should always think of what you do as a maxim or a rule for everyone. Done for the good of the person. So done for the good of people of society. And I should treat the actions of all other rational people as rules for me. So basically, treat others as you want to be treated and look to others for the example. He does make it clear though, so just drop that in either at the bottom of one of the boxes or underneath the boxes at the bottom of the page. For Kant, the second and third formulations are just clarifications of the first. He did not consider them something separate. All of Kant's argument is interrelated. You're doing very well, everyone. Please turn over your sheets when you are ready. Excellent. We only have 2 and a bit slides left, so we're nearly done. The final section of Kantian ethics, so you have 3 main sections: duty section, categorical section, postulate section. These are the 3 postulates. What is a postulate? A postulate is a solution to a problem. So my problem is, it looks a bit cold outside. I postulate I will need a coat. So that is the solution to my problem. What was Kant's problem? Kant's problem was, how can you live a life following duty, following the categorical imperative, doing this all with goodwill, and then never have any sort of reward? That was Kant's problem. He thought that this world is clearly wicked. This world is so cruel. People are good and there's just no ultimate reward. And so he comes up with 3 solutions. The first one has to be freedom. You have to be autonomous first of all. You have to be the authors of your actions, to use a Boethian quote. You must postulate that you are free. It is the highest degree of life and the inner worth of the world. Again, very poetic language from Kant there. All rational creatures are free, but they gain this freedom for adopting a formal law of action whereby principles can be universalised. Simple terms, we're free to follow the moral law or not, the moral law being the universalisability principle. Our reason grasps these rules, and moral choices are only possible if people are free to make them. We have to be free to do our duty. Remember the 3rd point, no authority command. You have to be free to do your duty. Otherwise, how can you be rewarded for something that you're made to do? You have to want to do it. We are fully rational beings capable of knowing absolutely what our duty is. When we make a moral decision, we are acknowledging our freedom. You, of course, are free to evaluate that statement that we absolutely know what our duty is. Explore it, develop it. Do we? But the crux of that first argument is that you have to be free. You have to be free in order to follow your duty in line with the categorical imperative in order to potentially receive a reward. If you're made to do it, how can you then be rewarded for something you're made to do? You have to want to do it for no other reason than because it's the right thing to do. The second postulate there is immortality. Perfect virtue ought to be rewarded with perfect happiness. Perfect virtue, doing your duty, should be rewarded with perfect happiness, the summum bonum. Perfect happiness and perfect goodness together is the summum bonum, or the highest good. Clearly, you cannot achieve perfect happiness in this life. Kant does call this world cruel and wicked. It is. You don't have to look very much further than what happens in the news. But he doesn't think just because you don't get it in this world that therefore it's not possible. He therefore postulates there is an afterlife. There is an afterlife where you receive this summum bonum. Therefore, there must be a part of you that's immortal, that lives forever. That is a soul concept. To be clear, Kant is arguing that virtue should be rewarded, not we should be good or virtuous to be rewarded. That bullet point there isn't very clear. To say it says to be clear, it isn't. What that bullet point is trying to say is that you aren't virtuous to get a reward. You are good and virtuous and then receive the reward because you've done what you should, because you've done what you think is right. So it's about intentions there. Don't forget, deontological, it's all about intentions. Your intention should be to do the right thing. You then get the reward. It shouldn't be, oh, I want the reward, therefore I'm going to do the right thing. So it's all about intentions. Your intentions have to be right. Human beings have the opportunity for endless improvement even beyond death. So even beyond death, you don't get to put your feet up. You have to, even in afterlife, continue to improve. Final one. This slide is quite full, so I'll give you as much time as you need. If the summum bonum can be achieved, there must be someone to ensure it happens. Kant never categorically argues there is an afterlife or there is a God, but he says if there is an afterlife and if we are rewarded for doing our duty, then God or a being must exist in order to ensure that. Happiness is distributed in accordance with the moral acts that people have undertaken, so your happiness is equal to the good acts that you've done. Say again, Kyle.
Trying to defend a problem he's found in his argument.
Oh, yes, so he's trying to justify a problem that he's found in his argument of why should people do their duty, and he's arguing because you might be rewarded in the hopes that you're rewarded, and therefore there's a God to ensure, oh yes, so he's filling in a problem with his argument, definitely. And you can argue whether that is successful or not.
That's
Problem with a problem, yeah.
But surely the second noble, the three postulates, that then thing is with personal gain.
Oh yes, hence, yes, hence why that he says you have to want to do it and then you have to want to do it and then you're rewarded, because otherwise you are doing it for a gains or you're doing it as a means to an end. But then isn't there always a personal gain in your mind? Yeah, you're always thinking, oh, it might be because I'm rewarded, so yeah, absolutely.
Surely perfect happiness and perfect goodness lines after the endless improvement. If it's perfect,
yeah, I like that. Yeah, why do you need to improve if it is perfect? Virtue and happiness, very good. Kant's argument is very, very easy to pick apart. That's gold for you in an exam. Do this one. If this comes up again, it might not, but you might get, last year there was not a business focused question, so you might get a question that says there are no such thing as ethics in business. You could then bring in Kant. Bring in Kant so you can evaluate Kant's approach. You might get Kant and sex ethics. It is your duty to not have extramarital sex. X or something, you know, the question will probably word it slightly different to that, but Kant is a very good one that you can quite easily evaluate, because if you look at each point, there are issues with it. So yeah, thank you for your points there. Yeah. Last slide then, there is one more slide, but it's only a tiny one, is the evaluation of Kant. It goes straight into the weaknesses. There are strengths with Kant's argument. Things like duty does give you a purpose and a focus. It's got positive elements, but this final box is for mainly the weaknesses. Is human reason really that reliable? Is it that good as a source of making decisions? Can anybody remember which of our thinkers argues that reason is not reliable, therefore you should go straight to divine law and scripture? Karl Barth is correct. Very well done, Alex. So you could link someone like Karl Barth to it. Karl Barth comes in all over the place. Now, as soon as you see the word reason, bring Karl Barth into it, because he argues you shouldn't look at reason because it is flawed. It isn't fallible, therefore you should go straight to divine law and scripture. Can you really switch off your emotions? Isn't the whole point of ethics to be linked with emotion? So then how do you switch them off? How do you ignore your emotion? Is there any such thing as an action that does not have an ulterior motive or personal gain? Doesn't everything have a personal gain? Ethics based on culture or cultural relativism. So not all rules can be universalised. They're not designed to be universalised, to become maxims. So, for example, China and their abortion rule, their abortion law, they're not saying they want everybody in the world to have to abort their second child if they've already got a boy, for example. They don't say that this rule should be applied to everybody. They're saying it works for us because we're heavily populated. And so ethics are not universalised. They're based on the culture, so they're culturally relative. It's quite cold and inhumane to argue that compassion, love, kindness are not moral, not ethical. To argue that it's not out of a sense of duty. Well, of course it is. You believe it's your duty to donate some money to charity, or give some clothes, or give your time in volunteer work because of the kindness that you feel. How is that not your duty? The bits are underlined just to help you summarise more briefly, because obviously there's quite a lot on here. Isn't the question what happens if everyone did this universally, so universalisability, not looking at an end result? So how is it not teleological? What happens if your duty can't be universalised? What happens if your duties conflict with the duty of a father and a duty to go to war, for example? Does everyone have a duty? How do you know your duty? Does your duty change as you get older? And what happens if your duty leads to a bad outcome? So, for example, Hitler. Hitler believed it was his duty to make Germany great again after the First World War. Yes, you could argue it was for a personal gain because he wanted to make Germany great. Yes, you could argue it was an emotional response, feeling as he did after the First World War and everything that he did. So you could maybe argue it wasn't duty in the first place. But if he could justify his actions as in line with duty, then that would mean, according to Kant, it was morally blameless. Final slide then. Final slide for, same box please, same big box because it's only little. It's the axe murderer weakness. Now, the axe murderer weakness is not presented by anybody. It is just an argument that's out there. And basically it's just the idea that if you have to do your duty, which is not tell a lie. So imagine that somebody comes running into the classroom now and says somebody's trying to kill me with an axe, and we say get into the cupboard. The axe murderer then comes to the door and goes, where are they? Our action, our duty is to not tell a lie. So we have to go, they're in the cupboard, knowing full well the axe murderer is then going to kill them. Kant would argue we are totally morally blameless because it's your duty to not tell a lie, even though the outcome is they die. The outcome is not as important as the duty itself. Clearly that's ridiculous. So clearly it is better to tell a little white lie than to let somebody die, even though it is your duty not to do it. So this just shows that in extreme situations, the whole idea of doing one's duty does not always work. Duty is not always the most important, action is not always the most important, and certain things mean you can never be morally blameless.